I think what this shutdown of Facebook and WhatsApp was really about was the Sri Lankan government looking to prevent any spread of misinformation after the attack or any more violence in the wake of the attack. And what this really speaks to is a growing mistrust for the role that Facebook and WhatsApp can play in especially countries like Sri Lanka, as well as India and Asia. This is really not the first time that a government has shut down access to social media. We saw the Indian government do this in 2012 with Facebook because of the spread of misinformation that was driving violence. But what's really different here is this is preemptive. This is not because there was information that was spreading and they were trying to stop that. This is that they were afraid of information spreading, and it just speaks to how much there is growing concern all around the world for the role that Facebook can play in inciting violence worldwide.
Right, and we saw the shutdown of social media also more recently with New Zealand, when there were some very violent videos being circulated almost immediately after those attacks. So, Andrew, doesn't this underscore the heightened regulatory environment that all these companies face, not just here in the United States, but also everywhere else in the world where it operates?
Well, the big thing that's going to affect these companies is that if they don't move to regulate themselves, then you're going to see government overreach and kind of regulate these platforms, just as we're seeing in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a history of doing this. Other countries have blocked social media sites before. So, I mean, this is something that we're going to continue to see if the platforms themselves don't start to kind of address these issues.
This is a very slippery slope, Andrew. I would imagine. I mean, one day the Sri Lankan government is doing this preemptively, and another day another larger country is doing it as well preemptively under the guise of preventing the spread of misinformation. I mean, I would imagine that would be a concern for you.
It is. I mean, at the same time, there are ways, obviously, to get around it using VPNs. But at the same time, when you have governments that are basically not trusting these social media platforms and concerned about them causing and leading to violence, you could definitely see where we might see more censorship on the part of governments to try to combat this issue.
Julia, oddly, these platforms could be the first best place to get information about some kind of impending issue. But are these countries, China, of course, is a completely different story. Are other countries, do they have the resources to be able, or for the companies themselves to report this kind of activity? Even here in the U.S., are they sophisticated enough to be able to spot things like this before they happen?
Well, I think there are a couple of things at play here, Kelly. I mean, it was only a few years ago that companies such as Twitter and Facebook were really credited for Arab Spring, giving people a voice, the value of that open exchange of ideas. And now the narrative has really shifted, and there's much more concern about how that open exchange of ideas means the spread of misinformation and also the incitement of violence. So I think there are a couple different things at play here. And I think that we're going to see both the rise of Facebook and these other platforms trying to regulate themselves and try to do this very delicate dance about what is allowed in each of these different countries. And it's not just about fake news, it's also about violent and offensive content. And we're also increasingly hearing this drumbeat that these companies should have to pay if they don't do a better job at taking all of this bad content down.
Andrew, last question here, and that is, if a company has to spend resources, spend money to self-police and or spend resources, spend money to comply with regulation, are we now creating an environment in which new social media companies, it'll be harder for them to break through and compete against the likes of a Facebook or Google or some of these giants that exist already?
Well, I think it was already going to be difficult for any new company to come along because of the fact that companies like Facebook already have so much information and data from us, and it's not transferable to another platform. But Facebook's going to face problems because of the fact that while they're very good in English-speaking countries and dealing with cultures and so forth that kind of relate to where the platform is, they have struggled a lot more in countries that aren't speaking English or have a different culture, which is essentially where the market's going to be for these platforms for growth outside the United States.